Greetings, travelers. I'm your host, the C. that knows a lot, Dr. Waluigi. Finally! It is time to talk about the best Transformers series of all time. Yes, we finally get to talk about the show that introduced me to the Transformers universe and continues to prove that anything the US can do, we Canadians can do better. At least in the television market. But regardless, for its 30th anniversary, let's take a look at my first Transformers TV series and sequel to the G1 show. This is my review of Beast Wars. The show was created by Bob Forward and Larry DiTillo, who worked with Canadian company Mainframe Incorporated and Hasbro to create Beast Wars after Hasbro was impressed with Mainframe's first project reboot. The show would go on to be a groundbreaking success, winning a Daytime Emmy Award for Outstanding Individual Achievement in Animation, which led to a divisive sequel series and other merchandise, including video games, comic books, a separate series that was developed and released in Japan, and of course the toys. Though several of the characters of the toy line started out a little differently. An example is with the two leaders, Optimus Primal and Megatron, whose first designs were a bat and a crocodile, but were then changed to a gorilla and T-Rex as a homage to that of the King Kong characters. As I've stated in several of my videos, this was the first show I ever saw when it came to the Transformers, having watched it on YTV. Though in Canada, for some reason, the show's title was changed to Beasties. I don't get it either. And owning 4 of the VHS tapes, which I constantly watched over and over again with my brothers. While I did own some of the toys, they were all my brothers and cousins' toys, but I still played with them all the time. However, while I and many others love this series, there are some who have other opinions. Yeah, a lot of old-school Transformers fans have expressed their disdain for the show, going so far as to create the phrase, "truck, not monkey," and many of those same fans have gone to conventions telling the cast members how much they hated the show. Class act, jackasses! But despite these annoying pests, the show is still loved by its small fanbase, and Hasbro has at least allowed many of these characters to make cameos in other series, as well as include them as side characters in the most recent live-action Transformers movie. Though in my opinion that movie was very disappointing and didn't live up to the hype that we Beast Wars fans were expecting. The show takes place 300 years after the events of the original Transformers series, focusing on the descendants of the Autobots and the Decepticons, the Maximals and the Predacons, who have been at peace for a long time until a renegade group of Predacons take a ship and use the new transwarp drive to try and head to Earth, intending to steal some Energon in order for the Predacons to begin a new galactic conquest of the universe. But they are pursued by a few Maximals that end up following them to a new prehistoric planet, where they decide to take on the shape of the animal life on this planet, where they begin the Beast Wars. Time for another split of our characters! There are going to be some characters that I will leave out in this section, but I will mention them as I talk about the individual seasons. In the meantime, here are the main characters that we follow throughout the show. With the heroes, we started out with just 4 characters, but slowly throughout the show they grew to about 10, though by the end of the show only 6 of the characters ended up surviving. All of them are just as lovable as the characters from G1, maybe even more, though I'm only going to talk about the first 5 from Season 1. Optimus Primal, voiced by Gary Chalk. The leader of the small group of Maximals and the descendant of Optimus Prime, Primal wasn't destined for greatness or was even a great soldier. He and his crew were just scientists that got thrown into a war and now feel the responsibility to take down the Predacons and bring them back to stand for their crimes. I think that's what I like about him, as he starts out as someone who definitely acts like a leader, but as the show went on, he showed more and more signs of not being too sure if he was doing the right thing. But he would grow as both a leader and a great character, one who would even rival the great Optimus Prime himself. Rhinox, voiced by Richard Newman. The medic and engineer of the group, Rhinox was the descendant of Ratchet, and was the one who would help build devices to help the other Maximals or would repair the group and their weapons. Rhinox was the unofficial second-in-command of the Maximals, and was the wise old man who would help guide Optimus as well as keep the others in line, with him being the muscle as well. Rhinox was one of my favorite characters for being the one that cared the most about his fellow Maximal, but didn't take shit from anyone.
I'm in a bad mood. Understand?
Some of my favorite episodes in this show are Rhinox-centered episodes. His brand of knowledge and pure muscle was a nice combination and a welcoming take on the gentle giant character. Dinobot, voiced by Scott McNeil. Starting off with the first character voiced by Scott McNeil, Dinobot was the descendant of Grimlock and is the fan-favorite character of this series as he grew the most as a character, going as far as being the first Beast Wars character to be indoctrinated into the Transformers Hall of Fame and the 5th character who was indoctrinated. Dinobot started out as a Predacon who was kicked out of Megatron's ranks and tries to join the Maximals as their new leader by challenging Optimus to a duel, but ends up joining them as a warrior to help fend off the Predacons and protect the planet thereon. When the show started, Dinobot basically acted out all the time and tried to force himself into being the leader of the Maximals, only being kept in check by the other Maximals or if the situation was dire. But by Season 2, he started to question his place in the universe and wondered if his choices were his own or preordained. I will talk more about that specific episode when I talk about the seasons, but suffice to say, Dinobot is probably my favorite character, as he was the most noble one despite being born a Predacon. Cheetor, voiced by Ian James Corlett. The youngest member of the group and is clearly the descendant of Bumblebee. Cheetor was the character I remember many kids liking the most cause he was relatable to the younger whippersnappers. For me, I thought he was okay. I never loved him in the first season, but he did grow on me and became my favorite designed toy from the second season. Though that is because we had the toy of the character, but I feel like he's gotten the same treatment as his ancestor, where everyone likes him for being relatable, but I'm not in that camp. Rat Trap, voiced by Scott McNeil. The spy and second character that was voiced by Scott, Rat Trap was the descendant of RC and my favorite character as a kid, cause he was such a snarky asshole that hated every second of being stuck on the planet they were on, but was often forced to deal with this war and the situations thereof. I do still love the character, as his lines are the most quotable, like, "We're all gonna die," or as many jokes and bits between Dinobot, which is literally just Scott arguing with himself. But I feel like the other characters have better moments or are much more relatable, at least when I rewatched the series. For the villains side, we had a start of 6, but those characters were rounded down to 2, with most of them either dying or switching over to the Maximal side. Again, I will only talk about the same few characters that were introduced in the show, though, let's face it, they're more memorable due to the memes this version of Megatron created. Speaking of whom... Megatron, voiced by David Kaye. The leader of the Predacon rebels, this version is not quite as intimidating as his G1 ancestor, but he was just as cunning and smart. The main thing that most people will note is his many fun mannerisms, like saying, "Yes," at the end of certain sentences. I love how this character was perceived as an incompetent leader, but is shown as much more intelligent than he appears to be throughout the show. Which is obviously intentional, but it's still fun to see that people mostly remember this character for David Kaye's amazing performance. Waspinator, voiced by Scott McNeil. Yes, Scott even voiced one of the villains, and it's the one that I don't understand why people still love. Waspinator was one of the scouts for the Predacons, and he's basically the joke character in the series. His whole shtick is that he got blown up all the time, had a funny speech impediment, and only survived the end of the show because he was loved by the fans. I'm not saying I hate the character, as he does have many funny moments in the show, but his whole character was that he was the punching bag and never grew throughout the show until the end. He grew on me enough, but I wish there was more of a character arc given to him than what happens at the end of the show and his sort of appearance in Beast Machines. Scorponok, voiced by Don Brown. This was the least interesting character on the villain side. Scorponok was a weapons specialist for the group, but didn't have any character outside of just being the other punching bag, and was, for some reason, a die-hard follower of Megatron. He had one episode where he actually did something kind of effective, but after that episode, he was just relegated to being the other slapstick punching bag character. I am aware of how he was going to continue throughout the show, but was killed off after the creators found that people preferred Waspinator compared to him and the next character I'll mention. Terrorsaur, voiced by Doug Parker. Not only was he the descendant of this character, but he even had the same voice as our favorite two-timer, Starscream. Most of the episodes with him tended to be about him trying to take over the Predacons and lead them to glory, which always blew up in his face, and while he almost reached the same punching bag character type as Waspinator and Scorponok, he wasn't as dumb as those two and became a much more threatening villain during his time on the show. But like Scorponok, he too was killed off in favor of them keeping Waspinator around, which I found to be rather dumb, as the creators could have kept him around for more episodes since he was just as popular as Starscream. Tarantulas, voiced by Alec Willows. The lead scientist of the Predacons, Tarantulas was the character that you weren't sure what his true motives were, as he constantly flip-flopped from being a follower of Megatron's to a solo agent with his own agenda, who connived and cheated his way into the group of Predacons. That would somewhat become more clear of what his role was in the show, but we'll get to that in just a moment. If I had to describe in one word what the first season was like, I'd say it's discovery. The show's focus was on the Maximals acting as explorers and scientists, discovering the many strange objects and locations on the planet they're stuck on, which had them encounter different places with strange markings. But this was an action show that would have the Maximals and Predacons fight each other for Energon, or the Predacons trying to acquire more soldiers. As before they crashed, the Maximals sent out several of their crew out into space as they were in stasis pods for the journey ahead. Or as most people figured out, it was the way the writers could introduce other characters that would introduce more toys. In the first season, there were 4 characters introduced between the Maximals and the Predacons. On the Maximals side, we got Tigatron, voiced by Blue Mankuma, and Airraiser, voiced by Pauline Newstone. They were the solo team of the crew due to them being damaged when they crashed onto the planet. I will say Tigatron was probably the coolest character in the show, as he was much like Rhinox as the wise old man, but with less muscle and more stealth and cunning. Airraiser was the badass woman of the group, who I admit I had a huge crush on for being this kind yet sassy woman character that completely destroys Terrorsaur in her first episode. For the Predacons, they were able to capture 2 of the Maximal Stasis pods and reprogram them to be on their side. There was Black Arachnia, voiced by Venus Terzo, and Inferno, voiced by Jim Burns. With Black Arachnia, she was the femme fatale character that could take down all the boys. But she wanted to be free of the constraints she was under with the Predacons and Tarantulas, since he was the one who had created different ways to control her. Inferno, on the other hand, was a crazed and loyal member of the Predacons, mostly due to his imperfect programming where he thinks he's an actual ant, to the point that he calls Megatron his queen. But the main thing that was really great was how the season ended. Throughout, we saw the Maximals coming across different alien objects that, due to their many battles, would get taken over and eventually destroyed by the Maximals and Predacons, which meant that inevitably the aliens would come and deal with the problem themselves, and that led to them using a planet buster. But the Maximals set up a plan to try and stop them, which succeeds, but at a great cost with the loss of Optimus after Megatron messes with the escape pod that he's using to stop the planet buster. Season 2 was quite the roller coaster from how it started to how it ended. With the beginning, we see the Maximals preparing for the initial impact of the Planet Buster's explosion, and the impact does little more than just shake the world, as the explosion causes a quantum surge that mutates several of our heroes into new transmetal bodies, or makes new toys for the kiddies to buy, which gives Cheetor, Rat Trap, Megatron, and Tarantulas new abilities like having secondary transformations, such as Rat Trap and Tarantulas being able to turn into a car or motorcycle, or Cheetor and Megatron gaining the ability to fly. The season would also bring Optimus back as a transmetal, where he turned into a monkey on a hoverboard, and despite not owning the toy, I'd say that this is my favorite design of the character. Most of this season, I'd say, focused on revelations. The biggest being that now that the Planet Buster is destroyed, it is revealed the planet that the Maximals and Predacons were on was Earth. and that Megatron had really been planning to come back to Earth when he discovered a message on a golden disc that he stole from the Maximals, which carried a message from the G1 Megatron to inspire the descendants to rise up and continue the war that the Decepticons and the Autobots began. Which this Megatron planned to do from the beginning by tricking a crew and stealing a ship to come and grab Energon from Earth. What I loved about this setup was that we didn't know that this was Earth, as the writers and heads at Hasbro weren't sure if they wanted this to be a continuation of G1 or an original series. But after how well the toys were selling, Hasbro ended up giving the okay to the writers to have this take place on Earth, which led to the best episodes of the show, especially with Dinobot. With that being said, there were a lot of newer characters that were added and referenced despite the writers changing things up. First off, the villains got a big change as both Scorponok and Terrorsaur died at the beginning of the season by falling into the lava beneath the Predacon base, which I find strange as they still released the Transmetal toys for them, so it just felt like they wasted money on creating new versions of characters that never appeared again in the show. The same thing goes with the Maximals who lost Tigatron and Airraiser after they get kidnapped by the aliens and don't reappear until Season 3. Well, sort of. So instead, we got 3 new characters, 1 for the Maximals and 2 for the Predacons. On the Maximal side, we got Silverbolt, voiced again by Scott McNeil, who played the stoic hero that had a code of honor but was often tempted by Black Arachnia. His and one other character's introduction was to, again, sell off new toys which were called Fusors, a combination of 2 animals into one, with Silverbolt's being a wolf and an eagle. I liked Silverbolt mostly because he was a strong and noble character, but wasn't quite as smart as the others, often getting easily tricked by the others and Black Arachnia, and having his own dumb stoic poetry like calling Black Arachnia his dark poison of his heart. Though he wasn't my favorite character that was voiced by Scott McNeil, he was still a fun addition to the already amazing cast of Maximal characters. Moving on to our new Predacons, we have the other Fusor who was more than likely meant to replace Scorponok, and also ended up being another joke character. That being Quickstrike, voiced by Colin Murdoch, who was a combination of a scorpion and a cobra. The most we got out of this character was that he was, as Megatron so elegantly put it, a boob. He was written as a comedic cowboy with an accent and everything. And he was another joke character that got blown up, or was used as a punching bag by the other Predacons. He really got annoying after a while, and I was glad to see him in less and less episodes throughout the show. The last character of Season 2 was one that revealed quite a lot about the Maximal's true mission. Rampage, voiced by Campbell Lane, was a protoform that the Maximal Elders had created in order to copy the indestructible spark, or soul, of Starscream. It worked, only the protoform was a violent killer that ended up going on a violent rampage, killing several Maximal colonies before he was finally captured and sealed inside of a special stasis pod, which Optimus was given the task of dumping it onto an inhospitable planet where it would live its life in peace. Unfortunately, Megatron had other plans, and after the Protoform X was reawakened, Megatron decided to cut out half of his spark, put it in a vice-like device, and forced him to join the Predacon cause. This was the best character out of the Predacons, as he was the equivalent to a Transformer slasher villain that had a ton of great episodes like Transmutate, which showed his more, for lack of a better term, human side and gave us another look at how horrible war can be. Season 3 might have been the weakest season in my opinion, but that doesn't mean there isn't a lot to like about it. Continuing the Revelations theme from Season 2, the season begins with the second phase of Megatron's plan, which was to use the Transwarp Drive in order to go back in time to kill Optimus Prime and have the Decepticons win the original war. And while he does succeed at first, the Maximals stop his plan, repair Prime, and start setting up a new base where they protect their ancestors from being damaged and potentially wrecking the timeline. Most of the bigger changes throughout the season involve several characters getting a second upgrade, which was dubbed Transmetal 2, though only 5 of these characters would get this kind of upgrade. As far as new characters, we would only get 3, the first being a Transmetal 2 clone of Dinobot that Megatron created using one of the alien devices that he found, who was just an evil drone until the end of the show after Rampage dies and remembers who he is, as Megatron used the split spark of Rampage to give him life. The second was a new Transformer named Depth Charge, voiced by David Sobolov, who was the Maximal that captured Rampage after he killed everyone on the colony he was tasked to protect, who followed the trail of the Maximals to kill Rampage in an act of vengeance. He was a character that started out as the angry lone wolf, but he grew to help the other Maximals protect their ancestors. I liked him mostly for his design, and even though he wasn't in many episodes, he became a sort of mentor to Cheetor and was more and more dependable at the end of the series. The final character we got was a returning one. Sort of. We learned that the aliens who had been studying Earth are now getting irritated by the Predacons' constant disruption of the timeline and decide to fuse the bodies of the still-captured Tigatron and Airraiser into a new fusor called Tigerhawk. However, after a scuffle with Tarantulas, the souls of Tigatron and Airraiser return to their fused body and continue the fight against the Predacons with the Maximals. It was nice to finally have the original Season 1 crew back together again, and even cooler to see how Tigerhawk was able to gain and use the abilities that the aliens gave him. It seemed like the creators of the show had lots of plans for this character, despite him coming so late into the show. Unfortunately, those plans were dashed thanks to the incompetence of Hasbro. For you see, my fellow travelers, when Tigerhawk was introduced, Hasbro hadn't created a toy for him yet. And because this series was made to sell toys, Hasbro told the creators to kill off Tigerhawk as they weren't sure if they were going to make a toy of him. So, the creators wrote his, as well as several other character deaths in the series finale, only for Hasbro to change their minds and make a toy of Tigerhawk and release it a few days after the episode was aired. So there was no way for the creators to change it so that he lived and effectively ruined the potential of having a great character survive the Beast Wars. And I feel like that's what makes this season the weakest for me. The lost potential of ending this with more than just the main 4 cast members and 1 or 2 from Season 2, which is something I hated this season for, as we could have had Depth Charge and Tigerhawk survive and join the other crew members in leaving prehistoric Earth. I'll only be picking one episode or one storyline from each season, and believe me, this was a really hard decision to make. For Season 1, I think episode 15, The Spark, is my favorite. It was the introduction to one of my favorite female characters, and showed a lot of great fights with Cheetor and Rhinox facing off against Black Arachnia, Scorponok, and Terrorsaur, while trying to save a dying Airraiser in her proto-form, which shows great moments between the 3 Maximals. Season 2's best is, to no one's surprise, Code of Hero, the episode that put Dinobot in the Transformers Hall of Fame and proved that this show was just as capable of making great, heart-wrenching stories, with this episode about deciding your own fate and sacrificing yourself for a higher purpose. There's a reason this episode is so fondly remembered for having the most heartbreaking death in this franchise just as much as Optimus's death in the movie. Season 3 is the 2-parter Feral Scream, showing the growth of Cheetor from being a kid to an angsty teen, as well as having some great horror moments of his transformation into a Transmetal 2, which was done by force and basically turned him into a werewolf-like creature, which is my favorite classic movie monster. The worst episodes are ones that will probably be divisive amongst fans, but I still stand by what I will say about them. Season 1's worst episode is one that was close to the end of the series with The Low Road, where Rhinox is hit with a virus that depletes his energon reserves by him sneezing. Shortest reason for this being the worst episode of Season 1 is that it's a comedy episode that focuses way too much on Dinobot and Rat Trap bickering, and the ending where the Predacons are defeated by Rhinox farting at them after he ate some wild beans. Not shocking to see why this episode is often considered the worst of the series. Season 2 honestly didn't have that many bad episodes, but the one I think is the worst is Tangled Web, mostly because the episode connects very little to the main story and is just a break from the major plot, which I normally don't mind, but it's another episode that makes several of the characters look incompetent and why I felt some of the Predacons weren't a threat. And finally, Season 3's worst episode is Go With The Flow, where Tarantulas creates a cannon that can destroy the Maximals, but through wacky shenanigans, it leads to Megatron and Tarantulas stealing a cave girl named Una to try and repair the cannon. Yeah, this episode was the worst when it came to its comedy. A lot of it involves more bickering from the Maximal characters and the sheer stupidity that Megatron and Tarantulas face. Upon having Una repair the cannon since they can't touch it lest they get destroyed. It was just never funny to me, and that's the worst thing you can do with a comedic episode like this. I really don't get why so many fans still have a hate boner for this series. It has some of the best writing that the Transformers franchise has gotten, and the best characters that have been remembered as much as the original G1 characters. It still infuriates me that no one has been able to recapture the charm the show had, and that often the characters get relegated to the background, or are changed so drastically that they don't even come close to what the characters were like back then. I still think the Transformers have the potential to be given stories that are more than just dumb action flicks and can be enjoyed by everyone. And this series is proof of that, and is why I highly recommend everyone check it out. Overall, I give Beast Wars a 10 out of 10. While it does have a few bad episodes, and the animation is a bit dated, that is only surface level compared to the amazing writing, characters, and action scenes that this series was able to give us, and has made it stand next to the G1 series as the best show of the 90s. Thanks for watching, I'm Dr. Waluigi, and remember, don't judge a book by its cover, cause you'll never know what's inside. Good night, everyone.